There's a reason they quarantined the city. Too bad no one fucking told us what it was. The perimeter was marked with crumbling barricades and old biohazard signs half ripped from their hinges. But the real warning was the stench that hit us before we even crossed the perimeter. Rot, piss, and burnt hair. The kind of stink that you could taste in the back of your throat.
Jesus Christ.
Perez muttered behind me, gagging into his sleeve.
What the fuck did they do in here?
Nobody answered. The city was dead, or so they said. Evacuated was the official term, but we all knew better. Our objective was simple. Find Dr. Eli Grant, the CDC's golden boy. He was inside the quarantine zone when the military locked the whole place down. He'd gone dark after reporting his last message, which was one word: anomalies. Command wanted him back, alive. If we'd known what was waiting for us inside the city, we would have asked for a shit ton more men, or a fucking nuke. The streets were empty in that eerie, post-apocalyptic way, the kind where your lizard brain tells you something is watching from the windows. Buildings loomed like cracked teeth, storefronts gutted, streetlights flickering uselessly. It looked abandoned, except for the blood, fresh, streaked across the pavement like something had been dragged.
Movement, 10 o'clock.
Perez said, raising his rifle. I turned, just in time to see a figure lurching out of the alley. At first I thought it was a survivor, which tells you how brain-fucked I already was. I was only half wrong. It was a woman, or used to be. She was split in two, as if someone ripped open her torso like a packet of M&Ms. The first half of her just hung there, still attached to the side of her own body. Her long hair painting the pavement with a slick mess of blood and gore. She was walking. Well, her legs were. And then I saw it. My eyes went to the black mass, writhing, sprouting out of her ruined midsection, wearing her lower half like a cheap rental. The worst part? She was sobbing. Not screaming, not wailing. Just this horrible, wet hiccuping sound, like she knew something was horribly wrong but couldn't understand why her body wasn't obeying her anymore. What the fuck? That was the last rational thing I thought before I shouted, "Open fire!" Bullets ripped into her. No, not her. It. Gore splattered across the street, chunks of ruined flesh hitting the ground like wet meat. But it didn't go down easy. Its legs kept moving, arms jerking like a goddamn puppet with its strings cut. It wasn't dying. And that's when we heard them. Footsteps. Hundreds of footsteps. From the shadows of the ruined city they emerged. Twisted, broken bodies. Some dragging limbs that shouldn't be moving. Others twitching forward as if in stop motion. Heads lolling as if their bones had melted inside their skin. They weren't human. Not anymore. And we were fucked. The first rule of combat is simple. Never panic. The second rule, doesn't fucking matter when you're staring down a goddamn army of inside-out people. They came from the alleys, the shattered storefronts, the gaping holes in buildings that looked like someone had chewed through them. The sound of bare feet slapping against the pavement made my skin crawl.
Fall back!
I barked at my team, moving toward the nearest cover. An overturned bus half melted from whatever the hell happened here. Then the first wave reached us. We started with 5, and Private Adams was the first to go. We didn't even see what killed him, just heard the scream. 1 second, he was covering our 6. The next, he was gone. We found what was left of him minutes later. His chest cavity was split wide, like something had crawled inside him and left through his spine. Corporal Vasquez was next. He didn't die. He vanished. 1 second he was up ahead, scouting the alley with Perez, and at the next turn, it was like he was swallowed whole. We found his rifle 100 feet away. No blood, no body. Then Carlson. Carlson never stood a chance. The thing that leapt at him, it wasn't human-shaped anymore. Its spine arched backward like a bowstring about to snap, its legs working like stilts, and its arms had fused into something too long, too jointed. It didn't bite him. It wrapped itself around him. The black mass poured into Carlson through his mouth, his nose, his ears, like 1,000 tiny fingers trying to get inside. Carlson screamed, gurgled, twitched. Then his eyes rolled white. I fired. One shot, right between the eyes. His body convulsed. I only had a second to spare, but it looked like the black ooze tried to hold him together. But it wasn't fast enough. Carlson crumpled. That left 3 of us. Perez emptied half a mag into the torso of a thing that had no eyes. Just 2 gaping black holes where its sockets used to be. It didn't slow down. It grabbed him, fingers clawing for his throat, and he barely threw it off before it could latch on.
These fuckers don't die easy.
No shit. I watched Cooper take one down. 3 direct headshots, center mass. The body collapsed, twitching like a cockroach in its death throes. Then it stood back up. Okay, fuck this, I growled, switching to full auto. Rounds tore into the crowd. They staggered, some dropping, but none stayed down for long. Whatever was inside them, it moved under their skin, like a nest of black veins writhing just beneath the surface. And then the first one spoke. I damn near forgot how to breathe.
Bring more.
The voice came from a woman who didn't have a jaw anymore, just a gaping, oozing pit where it had been ripped clean off. Her tongue lolled uselessly, but the words, the fucking words, came out clear as day. Then another.
Bring more.
And another.
More.
I felt my stomach lurch. My trigger finger froze. Because that wasn't just some mindless horde. This was something else. Something aware.
We need a new plan, like now.
Cooper said, panting. Dr. Grant, I snapped. We get to Grant, we get answers, and we get the fuck out. Perez fired another round into a crawler, something that used to be a man but was now scuttling on all fours like an insect, its ribs splitting open and spilling something black onto the pavement.
Where the fuck even is he?
I pointed. The old research facility loomed in the distance, windows dark, the glass slick with something that might have been blood. Or worse. All I had to go by were photos and topographical maps of the city. But I'd bet my life that was it. The quarantine zone had been built around it, which meant whatever this was, probably started there. We ran. Not the tactical, calculated retreat we'd been trained for. This was pure adrenaline-fueled flight. The kind where instinct takes over and survival is the only thing that matters. The facility was 5 blocks away. 5 blocks of shattered pavement, burned-out cars, and bodies that weren't dead enough. 5 blocks through a city that had turned into something else. Perez was breathing hard beside me.
Tell me we have a plan, Sarge.
We get to Grant, we get answers, and we get the fuck out, I repeated, my boots slamming against the pavement.
You're assuming he's still alive.
We cut through an alley, the walls slick with something thick and dark. The smell was unbearable, like raw sewage mixed with rotting meat. Something crunched underfoot. I didn't look. Ahead, Cooper skidded to a stop.
We have a problem.
I saw it too. The street in front of us had collapsed. A massive sinkhole, at least 30 feet across, gaped open like a hungry mouth. But it wasn't empty. Jesus. Things were moving down there. At first I thought it was rats. Then I saw the hand. Then a leg. I didn't understand what I was looking at, and then it clicked. It looked like pale human husks. That's all I could think of. They were flattened as if hollow inside, and all that was left were skins. They reached, spasming, scraping against the asphalt as bodies twisted and writhed with the black tar below, crawling over each other in a churning mass of limbs and teeth. Cooper swallowed.
Nope, not dealing with that.
Agreed. I turned, scanning for another route, and that's when I spotted it. A department store on the left, its front glass shattered but the metal security gate still partially intact. The racks inside were overturned, but the shelves could be used for cover. Second floor vantage point. Possible supplies. One way in and out. To the right, a parking garage. Tight corners, limited visibility. Possible ambush spot. But if we made it to the top level, we'd have a clear line of sight toward the facility. We had options. Store or garage? I asked. Perez glanced at the approaching horde.
Store buys us time.
Garage gives us sightlines.
Cooper countered. The growling behind us made the decision for us. We sprinted toward the department store, boots crunching glass as we slid inside. I yanked the metal gate down as far as it would go, jamming it with a bent clothing rack. Upstairs, I ordered. We took the emergency stairwell, emerging into a ruined electronics section. TVs flickered static. Security cameras cycled through dead, empty hallways. A monitor on the checkout desk was still looping a local news broadcast from before the quarantine. I barely had time to register the anchor's panicked expression before a low, gurgling sound came from behind the counter. Perez swung his rifle up. Too late. A figure lunged out, thin and wiry, not like the others. This one wasn't torn apart, and it was fast. It dodged his shot. It looked right at me. This one still had intelligence behind its eyes. I fired, the burst catching it in the shoulder, sending it spinning. It crashed against a display case, twitching and snarling. Cooper took its head off with a single shot. Silence. Perez wiped his mouth.
Tell me I imagined that.
Wish I could, I muttered. Then we heard it. Movement downstairs. A lot of it. I ran to the window. More of them were pouring into the streets. Hundreds. And somewhere in the distance, a siren began to wail. Whatever was happening here, we were running out of time to figure it out. And I had a sinking feeling that Dr. Grant wasn't just waiting around for us. I watched from the second-floor window as they, the things, the not-quite-human ones, moved with purpose. The slow, shambling ones reacted to the sound, twitching, turning their heads in unison before lurching toward the source. But the faster ones, the ones like the bastard we just put down, they didn't flinch. They were waiting. Perez exhaled hard beside me.
We're fucked.
I gritted my teeth. Not yet. Options. We still had options. The facility was about 2 blocks away, but between us and that target sat a war zone. Twisted bodies, twitching things, and those goddamn sinkholes churning with human husks. The department store had bought us time, but time wasn't what we needed. We needed a way out. Cooper checked the stairwell first. Bad idea. Something was already down there, shuffling just outside the door, its wet, gurgling breaths seeping under the crack. He locked eyes with me, shaking his head.
We're not leaving that way.
Fine. Think. We had a second-floor vantage point. A half-barricaded entrance buying us minutes at best. A rooftop access hatch, if it wasn't rusted shut. Limited ammo and no guarantee the facility wasn't a fucking tomb, or worse. And then I saw it. Across the street, behind the tangled mess of wrecked cars and twitching bodies, sat a subway entrance. It was risky as hell, but if the underground tunnels weren't completely overrun, we could bypass the streets and come up right near the facility. Best case scenario, we got through clean. Worst case, we'd have to deal with the same kind of crazy down there, but at least this way, we could use the darkness as cover. I turned to Perez and Cooper. Subway. Perez snorted.
You serious?
Cooper glanced at the horde moving below.
Fuck it. At least down there we can use the dark to cover us.
I smirked. Decision made. Now we just had to survive the drop. The rooftop access hatch was rusted as hell, but after 2 solid kicks and a grunt of effort, it groaned open. The ladder led us to the gravel-covered roof, giving us a better view of the chaos unfolding below. The siren had done its job, pulling most of the shambling freaks toward some unseen point deeper in the city. But the hunters were still here, prowling, waiting. One of them, standing near a burned-out police cruiser, tilted its head up, and I swear to God it looked right at me. I dropped fast, pressing myself flat against the roof's edge. We're on a clock. Move. The plan was simple. Jump to the adjacent rooftop, a narrow, 1-story convenience store. Drop down into the alley behind it, cut through the wreckage, and make a break for the subway entrance. Easy peasy. Or it should have been. Perez went first, cleared the gap and rolled on impact. Cooper followed, landing with a grunt. My turn. I pushed off, and the roof gave out under me. I crashed through, slamming into shelves below, in an explosion of splintered wood and shattered glass. Pain exploded as my ribs hit a shelf. I groaned, pushing myself up, blinking dust and blood out of my eyes. Above me, Perez peered through the hole.
Jesus, Sarge, you dead?
I spat out a tooth. Not yet. Then I heard it. A wet shuffle from the back of the store. I grabbed my rifle, steadying myself as I heard the breathing. Ragged, staggered, wrong. A shape moved between the broken shelves. It was hunched, its head twitching erratically. A man, but not really. His body was twisted, one shoulder bulging too far forward. The flesh around his eyes had peeled away, exposing raw, blackened sockets. His jaw hanging loose like it had been unhinged, and inside I could see a black sludge moving around, and he was holding something, a fire axe. Cooper dropped in behind me, cursing.
Shit, Sarge.
The thing charged. I barely got my rifle up before it swung, the axe carving through the empty space where my head had been a second ago. I fired point blank, the bullets ripping through its chest, and it didn't stop. It swung the axe again. Cooper fired. The shot tore through its side, spinning it as the axe came at me. I felt an impact slam into my gut, knocking the wind out of me. I looked down, and I was hit with the side of the axe, thanks to Cooper. Then Perez was there, machete in hand, swinging low. The thing's leg came off at the knee. It collapsed, still swinging, shrieking like a dying animal. He gave one final blow that cleaved through the middle of its head, skullcap rolling away. Silence. For now. Perez grabbed my arm, yanking me up.
You're slow as shit today, Sarge.
Eat me. Cooper was already at the back door.
Let's move before more show up.
I took one last look at the thing we put down before we moved out. We ran. The alley was mostly clear, the subway entrance still intact. The metal gate was open, the stairs leading down swallowed in darkness. Perez flicked on his flashlight.
Last chance to back out.
I adjusted my grip on my rifle and went in. The three of us descended into the belly of the city, and above us, somewhere in the dead streets, the siren stopped. The subway station smelled like death. We stopped at the bottom of the stairs, rifles up, flashlights cutting through the thick dark ahead. Nothing moved. The turnstiles were busted, some twisted and broken, others slick with dark smears I didn't want to think about. Old emergency lights flickered overhead, barely enough to see by. Perez exhaled slow.
I fucking hate tunnels.
I ignored him, scanning the map on the wall. One stop and we'd be near the facility. Just had to get on the tracks and clatter. We all froze. Something had moved. Not close, not in our immediate line of sight, but somewhere deep in the tunnels ahead. Cooper asked in a low tone.
Think the trains still run?
Perez scoffed.
Yeah, man, let's go hop on the next express and grab some pizza.
Shut up, I muttered. We had two choices. Follow the tunnels on foot. Risky. Tight quarters, limited exits. No cover if we got boxed in. Check the maintenance corridors. Might be safer, but there was a reason those places gave people the creeps. Might as well be the tunnels, but smaller. I made the call. We stick to the main tunnels. At least we'd have visibility. Perez muttered a curse, but didn't argue. We climbed over the busted turnstiles and dropped onto the tracks. That's when we saw them. The wall of flesh. Bodies. A pile of them. Stacked high. Crammed into an alcove like someone had built them into the tunnel wall. They weren't just dumped there. They were arranged. I felt my stomach clench. Some of them were still moving. Not alive, but twitching. Pulsing. Perez took a step back.
Oh, fuck this.
Cooper's face had gone tense.
Sarge orders.
I clenched my jaw. I didn't want to turn back, but there was no damn way we were climbing that. I opened my mouth to tell them just that when one of the faces turned to look at me. Its lips curled into a smile. The air changed. Heavier, harder to breathe. Then we heard it. A dragging sound. Something huge was moving in the darkness behind the wall of bodies. All of a sudden, the corpse wall collapsed. We didn't fight. We ran like hell. We sprinted down the tracks, our flashlights bouncing wildly, shadows twisting against the tunnel walls. Behind us, the thing moved fast. It didn't run. It flowed. A tar-like mass of limbs and shifting flesh, pulling itself forward in unnatural jerks. The station ahead loomed in the distance. I saw the platform, an exit. But then I saw something worse. The tunnel ahead wasn't empty. They were waiting for us. Figures stood in the dim light of the next platform. Not monsters. People, armed, watching, and smiling. Perez gasped.
What the fuck is this?
The thing behind us let out a howl, deep, and so loud it shook my goddamn bones. We had 1 second to decide. Stay and fight whatever crawled out of the corpse wall behind us, or run straight into what might be armed psychos waiting ahead. I chose the third option. "Up!" I shouted, lunging for the platform's edge. My boots barely hit solid ground before I spun, grabbing Perez by the vest and hauling him up. Cooper wasn't fast enough. Something wet and wrong coiled around his leg, yanking him backward.
Fuck!
I dove, grabbing his arms just as the thing pulled. Its face, if you could call that writhing mass of meat and teeth a face, was too close, its breath like rotten meat baking under the sun. Cooper screamed. Perez grabbed my vest and pulled. We ripped Cooper free, leaving half his boot and a strip of skin behind. He hit the platform hard, clutching his leg. No time to breathe. The armed men were already moving toward us. 5 of them, military gear, scarred faces. They didn't look surprised to see us. The biggest one, bald, tattooed, grinning like he already knew how this was gonna end, stepped forward.
"Well, shit,"
he said.
"Didn't think anyone was dumb enough to come this deep."
I raised my rifle. Back the fuck up. His grin widened.
"Oh, I ain't the one you should be worried about."
Behind us, the thing in the tunnel howled. The platform rumbled. Perez leaned in.
We need to move.
The bald guy chuckled. Then he stepped out of the way as we heard a voice say,
That's the smartest thing you've said. Come on, soldier boys. Let's get you out of here before the big guy decides he wants seconds.
I didn't trust her. But right now, I trusted whatever was in that tunnel even less. They led us through the ruins, up crumbling stairs, through back alleys choked with abandoned cars, past apartment buildings with shattered windows and doors hanging loose like broken jaws. The whole city felt hollow. Dead, but watching. Perez leaned close.
This is a bad fucking idea.
I knew he was right. This crew weren't just survivors. They were organized, armed, and the look of being too comfortable with combat. Their base was a fortified hotel, a once fancy high-rise, now wrapped in barricades, floodlights, and razor wire. The lobby smelled like old blood and gunpowder. 24 or so more people stared as we entered, their faces ranging from amused to annoyed. Cooper's leg was a mess, blood soaking through his pant leg, but he was still walking. She snapped her fingers.
Get him patched up. Don't want him bleeding out before the fun starts.
I stepped in front of Cooper, gripped tight on my rifle. The fuck does that mean? She just smiled.
Relax, Sarge. We ain't gonna kill you.
They took our weapons. Didn't even pretend it was an option. Perez had to be physically stopped from swinging on one of them.
You'll get him back. If you're smart.
We sat at a long dining table, or what used to be one. Now, it was scarred wood, covered in weapons, empty cans and papers. Maps of the city were nailed to the wall with what looked like color codes. She leaned back in her chair, watching us like we were some rare new species.
Name's Ramos. You want to know what you saw out there and why they quarantined the city?
I said nothing, didn't need to. She smirked.
We were part of the first waves that came in. As soon as our boots hit the ground, there was a lockdown. Saw the military come in guns blazing, and watched them get torn apart like fucking paper dolls.
What are they? What's out there?
I know what they're not. They're not zombies, if that's what you're thinking. I mean, sure, they're walking meat sacks now, but not all of them are mindless shufflers. Not a bioweapon or radiation leak, otherwise, we'd been fucked a long time ago. It's worse.
I didn't buy it. You're full of shit, I said, leaning forward. Ramos arched an eyebrow. You sit here, making it look like you got all the answers, like you've seen more than we have. Yet somehow, you don't know what these things are, only what they aren't. That doesn't track. Ramos grinned.
You think I'm lying?
I think you're leaving shit out. The other guys around the table, her guys, shifted. Some smirked, entertained. Others? Not so much. Perez tensed beside me, hands flat on the table, but he let me talk. Ramos let the silence stretch.
All right, Sarge.
Her voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp.
You want to know how we know what they aren't? Because we've been testing.
Testing?
You see things long enough. You notice patterns. We've had time to watch. Time to experiment. We've thrown almost everything at them. Bullets, fire, electricity, explosives, silver, holy water, fairy dust.
She leaned in, all humor gone.
They don't burn like normal flesh. They don't rot like corpses. They don't act like animals. They don't spread an infection.
She winked at Cooper.
And if you think they follow the same rules as anything you've ever seen before, you won't last long out there.
I glanced at Perez, but he was staring hard at the maps on the wall. Cooper, who was a little pale and sweating from the pain, gritted out.
And what does that make you? Scientists, researchers?
Ramos laughed, full out, and so did her guys. She leaned back, spreading her arms.
No, we're Red Echo.
Fucking wonderful, I muttered. A mercenary unit, guns for hire. I heard of their outfit. I also know they get paid off the books to clean up messes that never made the news. I narrowed my eyes. So what, you're the cleanup crew? Ramos's smirk faded slightly.
We were sent in to contain this shit. That was the mission. Set up control points, assess the threat, eliminate if necessary. HQ went dark on us real fucking quick. No backup, no evac, no orders. So we adapted.
Adapted how? Ramos smiled. I hated that smile.
By making ourselves useful. But funny thing about this one, though, the brief didn't level up to what is actually happening here. Of course, it never truly does. But this was a whole lot of shit. A whole lot of people weren't talking about. We only figured that out later. But for now, we're winning.
Winning?
We've got food, water, weapons. I call that a real fucking leg up from what you have.
I looked around. Yeah, she had us there. The room was silent. Then I realized the city was silent too. Perez noticed it at the same time I did. He swallowed.
Why is it so quiet?
Because it's feeding time.
And then, outside, something screamed. The Red Echoes reacted fast. Weapons lifted. Boots pounded the ground. Men moved like a machine, spreading out along the perimeter. Because whatever was outside, it wasn't their first time dealing with it. Ramos grinned.
Well, Sarge, looks like you get to see what we've been testing on.
A searchlight pivoted toward the outer wall, just in time to catch movement. It wasn't clear at first. A blur of shifting black against the concrete, like a shadow with weight. Then the screaming started. One of Ramos's men went down. No gunfire. No explosion. 1 second he was standing there, the next, he was just gone. A rifle clattered to the pavement. Someone shouted, but I wasn't listening. I was watching, and what I saw shouldn't have been possible. The body, what was left of it, was flattened. Not crushed, not torn apart, just thin. Like something had pressed all the space out of him, like a human skin suit left behind. I swallowed hard. Ramos, to her credit, didn't flinch.
All right, boys, you know the drill. Light it up!
Gunfire erupted. I grabbed Perez. Find my rifle. He nodded. We turned, only to find Ramos watching us. She smirked, casual as ever.
Leaving so soon, Sarge?
Before I could tell her we weren't leaving movement behind her caught my eye. Something massive crawled over the wall. I had two choices. Fight with the devils I knew or take my chances out there with whatever the hell that thing was. Then I turned back to Ramos. Give me a gun. She smiled, showing off her pearly whites.
Smart man.
The second the rifle hit my hands, my instincts took over. Check the magazine. Check the chamber. Feel the weight. It wasn't my weapon. But I'd be damned if I was going down without making these bastards bleed first. A shadow passed over us. A massive, shifting thing. For a moment, all the floodlights went dark, swallowed by something I couldn't comprehend. Like the night itself had come alive. Then, the screaming began. A red echo was snatched up, lifted into the air by nothing I could see. 1 second he was on the ground. The next he was hanging 20 feet up, legs thrashing, arms flailing, until his body folded in half with a sickening crunch. Perez swore.
Pinche puto.
Ramos? She didn't even blink. She raised a fist, signaling to her men through comms.
Light that motherfucker up.
They responded immediately. Floodlights locked on. tracking whatever the hell this thing was. And for the first time, I saw it. Or part of it. A monstrous limb, long, black, and stretched tight like taut sinew wrapped in wet leather. It curled around the soldier's body, gripping it like a vice. And then, it pulled. The poor bastard's skin stretched. He shook, like his whole body was fighting to stay in one piece. But the thing didn't care. It just kept pulling, tearing him apart. I forced myself to look away. I'd seen some nightmare shit in my time. But this? This was something else. Ramos reloaded smoothly, eyes locked on the thing still clinging to the wall. And then, the floodlights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. I tightened my grip on the rifle, every nerve in my body screaming, "Move, move, move." But I didn't move. Not yet. Because somewhere in this pitch-black hell, something was hunting. A hand slammed down on my shoulder. I twisted, ready to fire, but Ramos's voice cut through the dark.
Easy, Sarge.
I heard men moving. The floodlights flickered back on. The thing on the wall was gone. So was the body it had been pulling apart. But the blood was still there. A long smeared trail of red and intestines leading back into the shadows. Ramos wiped the sweat from her face with the back of her hand, then nodded at me.
Still think we're the bad guys, Sarge?
I laughed. Short, bitter, fucking humorless. Yeah, I said, shaking my head. I do. I wasn't just sent into this city with my team. I was deployed. Ordered into this nightmare with barely enough intel to survive. And the people who sent us? Red Echo. Ramos's people. They said the city had gone dark. That people were missing. That there were anomalies. They didn't say they had boots on the ground before the quarantine. Didn't say they already knew what was in here. When my team hit the ground, it was us that was left in pieces. Ramos? She knew about this. I saw it in the way she moved. The way she commanded her men like she wasn't surprised by any of this. Like she had already seen this horror before. I stepped in close, lowering my voice. You want to convince me you're the good guys? Start by telling me what the fuck you were really doing here before we arrived. She exhaled, her jaw clenching as she looked at the blood trail smeared across the ground, at the walls streaked with claw marks and something worse. Then she turned back to me, voice cold as steel.
We were doing what your teams couldn't.
The Red Echoes started moving, securing the area like they had somewhere to be. Why are you shutting down shop? I said. Ramos started walking and didn't break stride.
Before you princesses started making a shit ton of noise in the tunnels, we were on the way to the facility. We go now.
I snorted. Funny, don't remember asking for an escort.
Sarge, you can do whatever the fuck you want. But if you want answers, fall in line or get left behind.
I didn't like it, but I'd be stupid not to stick with more numbers. We moved, fast. Every step through that ruined city felt like walking through a graveyard that hadn't realized it was dead yet. The streets were still, but I could feel it. That weight in the air like a storm was about to hit. Perez was muttering under his breath. Cooper's eyes scanned everything. A gust of wind swept through the streets, carrying a sound. Not a growl, not a screech. A low guttural vibration. A hum. Deep. Ramos stiffened. What the hell was that?
We need to move.
One of her men cursed under his breath.
It's them. They're waking up.
I felt ice crawl down my spine. We scanned the area. Then, as if on some unseen cue, we turned around. And in the distant glow of a flickering streetlight, the shadows moved. Not like people. Not like anything I'd ever fucking seen. Some jerked forward. Some slithered fluid-like on the pavement. Others just stood there, motionless. Like pillars standing in a sea of moving bodies watching us. And all at once, they ran. We bolted. Not out of fear. At least that's what I told myself. We ran because standing still was no longer an option. The hum thickened in the air, vibrating against my skull like a migraine trying to bore its way in. Cooper cursed. Perez's breathing was ragged. Ramos and her men were silent, all except for the one at the rear, who kept making noise as he tried not to throw up. That's when I skidded to a stop. Less than 100 feet away, we saw her. A girl, she might have been in high school, was split in two, just like the one I saw when we first hit the ground. I wish it was a sick trick of the light, but I knew better. Her torso hung like torn fabric, barely attached at the side, fingers sliding against the pavement, leaving thick rivulets of blood. Her legs kept walking steady, wearing her upper half like a grotesque cape. But it wasn't just her. It was all of them. My breath caught in my throat. Bodies, ripped, mangled, violated, all of them moved. Torsos flopped loosely, some hanging by strings of shredded flesh. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They were occupied. The mass beneath their skins pulsing, undulating. A slick, thick black mass blooming from their ruined midsections, like tar spilled from a corpse's gut. It filled them like stuffing in a broken doll, stretching inside their rib cages, hooking into their nerves, controlling every step. And the moment we saw it, the moment it knew we knew, they all turned toward us at once. Then the first one, the girl with the torn torso, ran. Not staggered, not zombie shuffled like the ones behind us. She sprinted. Cooper screamed.
Contact!
And opened fire, his bullets shredding flesh but not stopping the thing inside. I squeezed the trigger. Bullets ripped through them, and it didn't matter, because the black mass spilled out and kept moving. One of Ramos's men panicked, throwing a grenade. I barely had time to shout before the blast ripped through the street, sending chunks of gore and pavement flying. For a split second, I thought we had a chance. Then I saw it. The parts. The fucking parts. They weren't just lying there. They were crawling back together. The black mass slithered through veins, over bones, knitting bodies back into something else. Something new. Something bigger. Perez was the first to break. Not in the coward's way, in the survivor's way. He was already backpedaling, rifle up, toggling his comms. I barely registered what he was screaming into the mic, because all I could focus on was the things pulling themselves back together. The black mass inside the bodies was stretching, lashing, snapping like sinew and bone forced to obey.
Sarge!
Perez barked, voice raw.
Fall back, we can't...
And that's when the first one leapt. Ramos's men fired and the thing flung across 3 others.
Fall back!
Perez grabbed my shoulder and hauled my ass backward. He was right. We had to reposition. Because that's what you do when you realize you're the prey now. Cooper took point, his rifle still hot from the last volley.
We need to cut across the west block.
He snapped, and I knew he was recalling the map he saw back at base.
That building has underground access. We move now or we don't move at all.
There was no need to relay. Ramos and her men were right behind our heels. And then the hum stopped. We froze, disoriented. For the first time since this nightmare started, the hum, the constant, sickening pressure in my skull, was gone. I looked behind us. Every last one of them just stood there, some still broken, some half-reformed. Some looked like they were just taking a stroll, their heads cocked up, waiting. But I already knew before the question could form. They were listening. And that's when I heard it. The voice over our comms. The one voice I never expected. A voice that should have been dead.
Sarge.
It was Vasquez. And he was laughing. His laughter on the comms was wrong. Like static forcing itself into the shape of a human voice. Perez was pale. Cooper's rifle was already up. I pressed a hand to my ear, jaw tight.
Vasquez.
My voice came out steady, sharp.
Where are you?
The comms hissed. Then the laughter cut out. And I heard it, right behind me.
I never left, Sarge.
I don't remember screaming, "Move!" But I know I did. We tore across the pavement, Cooper leading the way, boots hammering the ground as we sprinted for the west block, Ramos's men covering the rear. We reached the entrance, an old maintenance door of what looked like an office plaza. I wrenched it open and we shoved inside, the men barricading it. We stood there, panting, listening. Outside, the streets were silent. I turned to Ramos. She was already watching me. Dr. Eli Grant. The name dropped like a grenade. She blinked. I stepped forward until I was just a foot away. She finally spoke.
First, get the fuck out of my space. Second, if you're looking for Dr. Grant, you're already too late.
My stomach sank. What the hell does that mean? She exhaled through her nose.
It means there's no saving him. Those things out there, it started with him.
Something scratched at the metal outside. Not a full attack, just a reminder. They were there, waiting. I turned back to Ramos. Talk. Cooper cut in.
We need to move before they come in.
No, not yet. Haven't you worked out that these are blitz attacks? This thing, it's not up to full capacity, or at least I'm betting it's not. It has to recoup after controlling the horde. This is how we were able to get you out of the tunnels. Not all of them will be in that hibernation state yet.
Fine, then answer my question.
Grant was studying something buried beneath this city. Something that was never supposed to wake up. 20 years ago, a research team detected something deep beneath the earth. Not on purpose. Whatever the original intent was, got lost in what was found. He was part of the first excavation team. They brought in the best. Geologists, biologists, linguists. Anyone who could help understand what they found.
I frowned. And what did they find? Ramos exhaled.
Him. It was a small blip on their scans at first. Something that would normally be overlooked or dismissed. And was. But there was a research assistant who was very thorough. After reviewing months of data, he saw this same anomaly. This. Vibration in one area. He was able to convince the powers that be that digging should start over this particular vibration. So, they dug. It took almost 2 decades of digging. I know what you're thinking. Sounds insane, but you have to remember digging diamond or coal mines takes this amount of time. But when you have a scientist who is showing data of something new, something that might be living, well, that gets the great and powerful Oz's all hot and bothered. When they uncovered it, the thing was barely the size of a teenager. Curled up, motionless. So they did what those types of people do. They fucked with it. When they brought it back to a lab, they thought they were bringing in some kind of alien. Its shape was humanoid, but its skin was something else. Black as oil, hard as stone. Then that's when the real fun began. Grant started talking to it. No one else could hear it, but Grant swore it was speaking to him. They thought he was going crazy. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He kept saying it wasn't an alien at all. Grant told them the being was older than the continents, something that was here long before us, older than the oceans. It had come to be when this planet was still forming, when fire and ice shaped the world, and it ruled, not alone, but among others. He said they shaped the land, the skies. They were part of the earth itself.
Bullshit.
Yeah? Are those walking meat sacks out there bullshit? Let me ask you something. Why does every culture in the history of history have stories about its first rulers? Ancient gods, forgotten kings, giant sleeping horrors beneath the ground. There's some weird shit out there, boys. Why don't take a look around? You're living in it.
So what happened? If they were so powerful, why aren't they ruling now?
The world turned against them. The air, the temperature, the magnetic fields. Something fundamental changed, and they couldn't survive it.
So what, this thing went into hibernation?
It had no choice. It couldn't live in the new world, so it buried itself deep beneath the surface. A tomb of stone, where the old Earth still remained.
And it stayed that way, until you idiots dug it up.
No, we had nothing to do with this shit. Anyway, it wasn't the digging that woke it. It was Grant.
Silence fell all around us. She inhaled.
It's time to move out. We need to get to the facility.
Cooper and 2 of Ramos's men took point. I thought for sure we'd see them. Those meat sacks, as she called them, all just standing there waiting for us. But it was clear. As we made our way through the rubble and broken streets, the facility took shape. An unassuming building just like the rest. but we knew deep in the belly of the facility it his secrets. Ramos led us to a lab of sorts, and while her men locked in and set up shop, she began searching for something and continued briefing.
Grant's obsession grew. He stayed with it, even as the others left the dig site. Even as the project started shutting down, he stayed, speaking, listening, learning. And then one night, the security feeds caught something. Grant stood before it. His lips were moving. Then he split open his hands, right down the palms, and bled right over it. He collapsed to his knees, convulsing. And the thing before him, it moved. We don't know how it works exactly, but when Grant bled, the thing changed. It stood and began to consume. They tried to contain it. They sent in strike teams, did quarantine protocols. Nothing worked. It was adapting, mutating.
And now?
Now, it's like it became the night itself. It formed into that giant black mass you saw. And it calls itself Nytherian.
The silence between us stretched. I finally said, "How the hell do you even know all of this?"
From his logs. Did you think I was just telling you a bedtime story?
She muttered. I frowned. Logs? She reached into a box and pulled out a small tablet. The screen was cracked. The casing was scratched, dented, barely holding together. And yet, as soon as she pressed the button, it came to life. A man's face flickered onto the screen, disheveled, and looking like he hadn't slept the past decade. Dr. Eli Grant.
My apologies for the whispering. I need to keep a log of this discovery for posterity, but I don't want to wake it. We thought it was an alien ship, some ancient crash landing that got buried beneath the earth long ago. The government only let us dig because they wanted what they thought would be new technology. Weapons. Advancements.
Grant glanced to the side, his eyes darting like he was expecting something, someone, to be there.
But it wasn't the technology that interested me. It was the being. Even though our machines picked up signs of life, we just figured our equipment was faulty. We thought we'd haul it up, put it in a lab, cut it open, learn from it. But everything changed when there were actual signs of life. We could not understand how something had signs of life after so much time and that far underground. We didn't understand what we were waking up. I didn't understand. Stupid. So fucking stupid.
His fingers trembled as he touched his temple, leaving a streak of dark blood.
I heard it, like a whisper under my skin. I thought I was going mad. But then, I started listening.
The video stuttered to black. I thought that was it. Then snippets of conversation between Grant and the being began.
What are you?
I am older than your stars. I ruled on this plane when your kind were but dust and shadows. We carved the land, shaped the skies, and we fed.
Why did you come here?
I did not come. I have always been.
Were there others like you?
Many. We thrived. We feasted on what once was. But then there came the change.
What happened?
The land, in its wrath, turned against us. The air turned bitter. The skies spoiled. The waters raged. One by one, they fell, their strength unraveling. I sealed myself away, deep in the mirror of this world, waiting for the time to rise again.
The screen flickered again. The doctor's face twisted with fear and something else. Fascination.
Something happened. A cataclysm event. Maybe it was a shift in the planet's core. Maybe the atmosphere changed as the Earth was forming. Or maybe something else happened. I tried to tell my colleagues. They didn't understand. This thing, it told me it ruled the planet with others. Creatures older than bones and blood. Entities that consumed everything until the very life force they fed on became poison. It knew it had to conserve its strength and wait for the right time. We called it the long silence.
His eyes snapped to the camera, wild and desperate.
It wants us to believe it is all-powerful. It was never a god. It was never a ruler. It was a predator. Something primordial. And I woke it up.
Grant's eyes rolled to the back of his head. Then the feed cut to static. The video ended abruptly, the screen plunging back into darkness.
Some of the logs are corrupted, but we got enough.
I looked at her, rage boiling under my skin. "And you knew," I said, voice low and dangerous. "You knew and still called us in blind. Men died out there. My men. Because you asshole mercs called for backup and didn't have the goddamn balls to tell us what we were walking into." Ramos's gaze hardened.
Oh, I'm sorry, fuckface. You think we had time to hold a fucking board meeting while this thing was ripping my people apart?
I stepped all in her personal space, knowing that would piss her off, and jabbed a finger at her. "You called for backup. You let my men drop in blind." Ramos's eyes flashed.
We both know there was not enough intel and you came anyway. You chose to come in blind. You think you're the only one who lost people? Quit feeling sorry for yourself and think. Before we lost transmission, we did warn your command with what the hell was happening. They chose to keep their mouth shut.
What?
Listen and listen up good, Sarge. I'm well past tired of your shit. I could have left your asses down in the tunnels, but didn't. We're the second team they sent in. The second. First squad went dark in under an hour. And when we got here, we realized they'd sent us in without a full briefing. But because us little old mercs don't play by your rules, I pulled my men back and watched, scouted, and learned. The third team came in a short time after, again, not knowing a goddamn thing. And instead of listening to me, to hold position, they went and got themselves pulled apart. Then you show up, and guess what? You don't know shit either. Ain't that funny? They don't care if their soldiers or special op boys die. They want to keep this quiet, keep it contained long enough to figure out how to spin it. Because if this gets out, if people find out there's some prehistoric nightmare puppet mastering corpses under their shitty shopping malls...
She whistled low.
Game over, man. Full-scale panic. Martial law. The whole goddamn country in flames.
I breathed through my nose. Hard. It made a fucked up kind of sense. It also made me want to put a bullet in someone's skull. "So, you're saying command fucked us?" She just looked at me. I exhaled. "Convenient. Let the soldiers and mercs get eaten so the suits can pretend everything's just fine." I looked at my men and rubbed my jaw. This was all kinds of messed up and I'd unpack it later, if I survived. But none of this changed what had to be done. I unfolded the blood-stained map from my pack, spreading it out. "All right," I said, steeling myself. "Where do we find this son of a bitch?" The room fell into a grim, low hum of energy as we prepared for the next step, because each one of us knew it was only a matter of time before it became strong enough to leave this city, and when it did, it would consume everything.
We need to hit it while this thing is getting its beauty sleep. This is our only window where we have a shot.
I nodded in agreement.
Oh, and Sarge, the next time you point your finger in my face will be the last time you have a finger.
Movement behind her caught my eye. One of her guys waved at me. He was missing his middle finger. The guy to his right smiled. I clocked his missing tooth. I looked back at Ramos. "You guys are fucking nuts." She smiled. Turns out she wasn't finished playing show and tell. Another tablet showed footage. Grainy night vision feeds of men and women getting overtaken by the black mass. It didn't just kill them. It entered them, pushing its way through and shoving out organs and blood, turning them into those ripped open things outside. But that didn't happen to all of them for some reason.
But if you kill the body before the process is complete, it won't rise again.
She pulled up another angle of security footage. This time soldiers were advancing, shooting at bodies.
I think you guys have gathered by now. It's controlling all the others. Every single one of those things out there. Even though they are not human anymore. They're not mindless. I don't know for sure, but it seems there is different degrees of control. The ones jacked up to all hell seem to be the lowest tier. Slower and have more of a baser reaction. Then there are those that are not torn in half. They're faster and seem to have more reasoning behind them. Then there's this.
She scrolled through the logs, pulling up another entry. Grant was shaking now. His eyes were pitch black. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite human. And he smiled.
They think they can stop me, but they don't understand. This is not an invasion. It is a return.
He grinned wider, black liquid seeping from his gums. The screen went dark. So you're telling me that the thing controlling all of this is inside that guy? Ramos nodded.
Grant didn't just wake it up. He let it take him. He slit his own palms to bleed over this. Nytherian. Everything we've seen so far leads me to believe if we take him out, all of them shut down.
I agreed. Like a hive. She nodded. Cooper leaned forward.
So you're saying, cut it off at the head?
And if it wakes up before we do?
Perez countered. Then we all become the freakiest set of Muppets ever. Something in the back of my brain shifted a memory loose. You said you'd been testing it, going balls to the wall, but nothing could take it out. What are we hitting it with then? We pored over old logs, searching for any clue. Any useful piece of information we could leverage. Ramos leaned forward, tapping at a passage describing a substance introduced to the entity, either inhaled or ingested, that had a delayed but devastating effect. But every critical detail, the compound, its mechanism, even the results, had been blacked out. This didn't seem to slow her thoughts.
If we go by this, we need to introduce something to its system, not just hit it with brute force.
Something corrosive, like a biological weapon.
Not in the way you're thinking. This sounds more like an erosion compound, something that degrades its structure over time, like an accelerated form of cellular decay. We know this thing isn't just a gas or shadow. It has a physical form. That means exposure should weaken it enough for a real kill shot. Think about it. Every time we've hit it in these blitz attacks, we've slowed it down, but no real damage was done.
The others began chiming in with ideas. Carter, a guy from the secondary team and built like a fridge, suggested a dispersal method using high-pressure gas canisters. Bakovich, the one missing a middle finger, proposed an aerosolized version, something that could be deployed in confined spaces. They debated the best way to introduce it: bait, airborne dispersion, or even direct injection if they could get close enough. That's when I cut in. Wait, if this shit breaks down organic tissue, how do we make sure we're not choking to death on it? Silence. Then Ramos spoke again, thinking fast.
This isn't an all-consuming nerve agent. We can target whatever Nytherian is made of. If it's anything like traditional biological erosion compounds, it's selective. We need something with a binding agent, maybe a protein marker, to latch onto its mass while remaining inert to us. If the lab cooked this up specifically there's a good chance it won't have the same reaction to human tissue, an even better chance it's still in this building. But just in case, we control dispersion, wear masks, short bursts, focused delivery.
They debated more on the best way to introduce this bioweapon. It was a problem until Perez said,
Why not just slice him open if you get close enough and detonate a canister inside the wound?
Ramos's team looked at him, then nods of approval. We had a plan. I watched as her team moved with practiced efficiency, pulling items from their packs and gathering supplies from around the facility. Bit by bit, they began to assemble makeshift bioweaponry, all while Bakovich and Ramos directed what should go where, adjusting concentrations and dispersal methods. Bakovich saw me watching.
Once upon a time, in a past life, I was a lab rat. Thought I'd change the world with science. Turns out, it was boring as shit.
I took a brief moment to feel a little shocked at how they strategized. I almost felt bad for assuming they had no brains under that muscle. I couldn't hold back anymore. I turned to Bakovich. Did she really do that to your finger? The whole room went silent, then erupted in laughter. Bakovich grinned, holding up his hand where one finger was clearly missing.
Damn right she did. Back when I was new to the squad, I had a bit of an issue with not being in charge. One day, in the middle of a mission, no less, I flipped her off. She told me if I did it again, I wouldn't have it. And like a toddler, I did it again.
He snapped his fingers.
Like a snake strike, she chopped it clean off with that mini machete she always carries.
Jesus, I muttered, shaking my head. Bakovich just shrugged.
To be fair, she did warn me when I was brought in that I needed to be 100% with her, or leave. And she also patched me up right after. Sat with me through every second of reworking this hand. She even customized a combat sling, outfitted with a blade for a middle finger. It really was the best Christmas present I ever gotten.
His smile was almost proud.
No, I'd gladly take off any finger of anyone who messes with the boss.
He winked at me. I got his message loud and clear, but I still smirked at that lunatic. I nodded toward Keller, eyeing his missing tooth. And you? Keller grinned.
I've always been a gambling man and decided to try my sleight of hand trick with cards one day. But word to the wise, boss don't like cheaters.
I looked over to see Ramos reading through more logs, but she couldn't hide the faint smile spreading across her face. Just as they finalized their plan, an unsettling realization crept over the group. The room had gone deathly silent. It's awake. Then came the sound. A low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate from everywhere at once.
Positions, now!
Keller barked. Then the fast ones came. Vasquez was among them. His movements were jerky but swift. An apex predator with the remnants of his old self still flickering in the way he moved. But his eyes were gone. Only the void remained. He lunged at Keller first, and he barely had time to react before Vasquez tore into him, dragging him into the darkness with a sickening crunch.
Keller!
Ramos screamed, unloading her rifle in a desperate attempt to reach him. But it was too late. Vasquez was already gone, and Keller wouldn't be Keller anymore. Cooper spun, backing toward me, panting hard.
Shit, we gotta...
Then Cooper was abruptly cut off by convulsions. I didn't know what the hell was happening until he fell to his knees. A black mass slithered up his neck, twisting into his mouth, his eyes rolling back as the corruption took hold. His body spasmed, muscles seizing. His skin cracked at the edges as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. I didn't hesitate. One shot to the temple. Cooper dropped, the sickening thud echoing through the chaos.
Move!
Perez roared, and we scattered, firing as the fast ones swarmed. The battle had begun, again. The moment the shot left my barrel, putting Cooper down before the thing inside him could take hold, I was already moving. No time to think. No time to grieve. The fast ones were everywhere. They came from the dark like a flood, and with them I saw Vasquez again. His movements unnervingly precise, like he still remembered how to fight. Only now, he was fighting against us. Ramos's voice cut through the chaos.
Fall back! We need distance!
We tore through the corridors, gunfire lighting up the walls, but they were gaining. One of them tackled Bakovich from the side, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle my teeth. He grunted, struggling, but was able to twist the thing's head backwards with a loud crack. I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, Ramos was already there, swinging her machete in a clean, practiced arc. The blade bit deep, severing muscle and bone. The creature spasmed, then dropped. Bakovich kicked it off, panting. We hit the next hallway, but the bastards were relentless. The air was thick with gunpowder and rot, the sound of rapid footsteps and guttural screeches closing in from every side. Then I saw it. Netherian, wearing Grant as a skin suit. It didn't move like the others. It drifted, almost weightless, its shifting form defying every law of nature. Those endless black tendrils lashed out, coiling through the air as if tasting the space around it. It wasn't chasing us. It was observing, calculating. It knew exactly where we'd go. "We're being funneled," I shouted. "They're cutting off our exits." A flash of movement. Vasquez. He was on one of Ramos's men, slamming him into the ground. He fought, but Vasquez was too strong. I leveled my rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. But he hesitated. Just for a second. Something flickered in his dead black eyes, like the Vasquez I knew was still in there fighting. Then he snarled and went for the man's throat. The shot was instinct. The bullet tore through Vasquez's skull, splattering the wall behind him. He went still, body twitching once before crumpling. No time to dwell. The fast ones were still coming and Netherian was closing in.
We have to set the charge now.
Perez grabbed the canister from his belt, fumbling with the release valve.
Cover me!
We formed a circle, unloading everything we had as he worked while Ramos's second team fought like hell. Netherian, wearing Grant's skin, moved closer. The dark mass surrounding Grant's body was like a grotesque shadowy halo, thick and dripping with black ichor. The air around it dense with something heavy. I could feel it in my skull, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts.
"Anytime, Perez!"
I bellowed. The valve hissed, and the canister erupted as Perez threw it, spewing the corrosive mist into the air. The gas spread fast, clinging to everything, creeping toward Netherian like a living thing. The entity paused, and then it screamed. Not a sound, more like an absence of sound. A pressure that vibrated through my heads made my ears bleed and made my vision blur at the edges. It recoiled, tendrils writhing, shifting, almost retreating back into Grant's body. It was working.
More!
We tossed more canisters, the air thickening with the compound. Our eyes burned, but we didn't stop. Netherian shuddered, limbs contorting, its shape distorting, struggling to maintain itself. But then, the shadowy mass shifted, a ripple, and just like that, it was gone. The silence hit like a hammer. No growls, no screeches, just us, standing there. Weapons raised, breath heavy, waiting for the next attack. Nothing. It took me a second to realize. Every fast one in the room, mid-lunge, mid-snarl, mid-kill, stiffened. Their bodies went rigid, heads snapping up in eerie unison, as if listening to something only they could hear. Then, one by one, they dropped. Bodies hitting the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Then the others followed, a sickening cascade of flesh and bone slamming into the hard tile of the facility. The black mass within them slithered free, oozing from their mouths, eyes, wounds. Desperate, writhing tendrils curling and retreating like dying snakes. For a brief, terrible moment, everything was silent. Then came the sound. A laugh. A guttural reverberation. He hadn't been destroyed. It was still here. I reacted on instinct and sprinted after those slithering masses. They were going somewhere, and my money was on back to where they came from. Netherian. I heard footsteps pounding behind me and knew the team was right on my heels. We rounded a corner and were met with a set of double doors. The hallway ahead was slick with black slithering tendrils that had peeled away from the human husks they wore, dragging their stolen life force toward their master as they twisted and pulled their way across the floor, vanishing beneath the doors. I took lead, flanked by Perez and Ramos, with Bakovich covering the rear. The rest of the team spread out, weapons raised, hearts pounding. I didn't want to follow, but we had no choice. We had to end this. The doors groaned open. The lab was massive, low-lit, cavernous, sterile. Flickering emergency lights cast erratic pulses across shattered equipment and overturned tables. But nothing in this place mattered anymore. At the center of the room lay its true body. It was enormous, twice the size of Bakovich, sprawled across what looked like an abandoned containment platform. Metal restraints hung loose, melted away by whatever foul ichor oozed from its monstrous form. Its body was black, shifting between solid and liquid, its surface textured like a fusion of reptilian hide and living armor. The last of the dripping masses slithered back into it, vanishing beneath the folds of its grotesque form. Then I saw him. Grant. Or what was left of him. He stood in front of the mass, swaying, unraveling. His body shook violently, skin sagging, turning gray, veins blackened like poisoned roots. The ichor inside him was leaving, streaming from his mouth, his eyes, the wounds in his skin, crawling back into the nightmare behind him. Nithirian was done with him. Grant's lips moved, but no words came. Just a wet, gurgling rasp. His fingers clawed at his chest, as if he was trying to hold himself together. And then the last tendril of darkness peeled away. His body collapsed, folding inward like his bones had turned to dust. His skin hollowed, shrank, and in seconds, there was nothing left but a desiccated husk. And that's when the thing moved. Like something waking from a deep sleep, it rose. Its eyes burning orange, like molten cracks in cooled lava. Not just looking at us, seeing through us, peeling us apart piece by piece. Ramos fired first. A direct hit to the thing's torso. The round struck, but the wound closed before the shell casing hit the floor. Then it spoke.
Foolish creatures.
The air thundered with gunfire, a relentless cacophony of destruction. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness in rapid succession, carving through the shifting, amorphous mass of Nithirian. Chunks of its body tore away under the onslaught, only to slither back into place, re-knitting like liquid shadow. It moved. Perez barely rolled clear as a massive tendril shattered the concrete where he had stood a second before, dust and debris choking the air. Ramos launched the flash grenades, their blinding burst casting grotesque, writhing silhouettes against the walls. Nithirian staggered, its form distorting, but it was recovering faster than we could hurt it. Bakovic shoved something cold and heavy into my hands, a pack of gas canisters.
Get this in close,
he shouted. No time to think, no time to hesitate. I sprinted, ducking and weaving through the debris, my breath ragged. Nithirian's tendrils lashed out, slicing the air inches from my face. Too fast, too goddamn fast. The thing was impossibly large, yet it moved with a predator's precision. The smell of rot and burning metal filled my nose. That's when I spotted them, unhealed gashes towards the rear from the relentless strikes. I reached the base of its writhing mass, yanked the pins, and rammed the canisters into an open wound as deep as I could shove them. My fingers barely left the metal when something massive struck me. My vision exploded into white-hot agony as I was hurled across the room, crashing into a pile of whatever the fuck scientists kept on tables in a place like this. My breath left me in a choked wheeze, then silence. A slow hiss filled the air. Nithirian screamed. The sound ripped through the space, a raw and warping, ear-splitting shriek like the world itself was fracturing. My skull vibrated with the sheer force of it. Its body convulsed, spasming like a thing possessed. Tendrils flailed, smashing into walls, gouging deep wounds into the facility's steel and concrete as the compound spread through its form. Eyes, unseen before but now opening all over its body, bulged, turning from lava to a milky gray, then bursting into viscous streams of black sludge.
More!
Ramos bellowed, her voice barely cutting through the chaos. She tossed another canister to Bakovic. He caught it mid-air, charged forward, and slammed it into another splitting fissure in the creature's body. The screaming intensified. The cracks deepened, widening like fault lines in its flesh. Something inside Nithirian buckled. Darkness poured from it in thick, bubbling waves, pooling at its feet. The entity spasmed, its amorphous limbs collapsing inward, its core warping and twisting under the compound's relentless assault. "Fall back!" I shouted, forcing myself to my feet. Nithirian's body lurched violently, its towering form curling in on itself. The air vibrated, rattling the steel beams above us. Then, detonation. A shockwave of pure, roiling darkness erupted outward, slamming us off our feet. The facility quaked. Lights flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows against the walls before blinking out altogether. The world vibrated, air pressure collapsing, my ears ringing with the aftershock. Then, silence. I gasped, sucking in ragged, smoke-choked breaths. My body screamed in protest as I forced myself upright. The air was thick with the stench of burnt flesh and chemicals. Black sludge coated the walls, steaming, evaporating into nothingness as I watched. The place felt empty, hollow, as if something massive had been ripped out of reality itself. It was gone. Perez groaned, dragging himself up, wiping a streak of blood from his temple.
We good?
Define good.
Ramos coughed, voice ragged. No one laughed. No one had the energy. The silence pressed in, suffocating. Around us, the facility was a graveyard. Vasquez, Keller, Cooper, more. Too many bodies, too much loss. Ramos exhaled sharply.
Now what?
Good question. We had come here expecting death, prepared for a final stand against something we couldn't hope to understand. But survival? That was a problem we hadn't considered. Perez checked his comms, shook his head.
No response from command. Either they bailed, or...
He trailed off, shrugging. Bakovich gave a humorless grin.
We're on our own, just the way I like it.
No backup. No extraction. No way out but forward. I clenched my jaw, shaking off the last dregs of shock. Then we move. Regroup. Get the fuck out of this place. No one argued. We scavenged what we could. Ammo, supplies, whatever wasn't soaked in blood or ash. The air felt lighter, yet something gnawed at the back of my mind. Nytherian had adapted. It had survived things no creature should survive. And if it had learned from us once, who's to say it wouldn't learn again? I swallowed hard and shoved the thought away. Even if it did come back, we'd be ready. One step at a time, one breath at a time, we pushed forward. Through the ruined corridors, past the wreckage, toward the light of whatever waited for us next. Toward survival.
There you have it. Our first full Pick Your Poison story chosen by you. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Until we meet next time.